My name is Pio De Miglia, and I'm moderating today this press conference, this Sayonara press conference from the Russian ambassador in Tokyo, Mikhail Yurievich Galuzin. It is not the first time that he accepted our invitation to speak at the club. We are already a little bit late, and I'm sure that being an association of professional journalists, we should know what Ambassador Galuzin represents and what he's going to say, so I don't think he needs a special introduction, and I'd rather go straight into his presentation and then to the question and answer from the floor and online. I believe that Ambassador is leaving in a few days, and he's going back to Moscow, right?
Yes.
Not to another post.
To another post, but in Moscow.
Okay. All right. So, please start with your speech. We are already 14 minutes late, so I believe that it's. Please do it short. Yes, so that we can have a lot of questions.
Sure. Yeah. Good evening, good afternoon, dear Pio. Good afternoon, dear members of the FCCG Japan. First of all, I would like to apologize for being late a little bit because, in final days of my tenure in Tokyo, I had today several events, so sorry for being late again. And thank you so much, dear Pio, dear friends, for this kind invitation to speak on the honorable floor of the FCCG and to share with you my views, my thoughts, and of course, first and foremost, to answer your questions. For me, as a diplomat and a Japanologist, it was a great honor to be appointed to the position of the Russian ambassador to Japan, where previously I spent 3 tenures as a diplomat of our embassy. I'm very proud of it, and I consider it a great honor and this trust which was showed to me by my leadership. And I all these years in Japan, including this term as ambassador, I've been feeling great friendship, great warmth, and great sympathy from my Japanese friends, whom I have here since my student times, back in 1982 and 1883, when I was studying in Soka University in the city of Hachioji near Tokyo. And just today I met with the friends who are working in Russian-Japanese friendship societies, various societies of friendship with Russia here in Japan, and I felt again and again that there is deep understanding and deep sympathy towards Russia, deeply rooted friendship for Russia here in Japanese society. Though maybe reading the mass media, one can get a different impression. During my nearly 5 years in Tokyo, actually there was a very, very positive period for the Russian-Japanese relations, because since 2018 to approximately 2020, thanks to the trust-based regular dialogue between President Putin and the then Prime Minister Shintaro Abe, the Russian-Japanese relations have made significant progress in many areas. And this was the period of of development of our relations, which fully responded to the interests of the Russian and Japanese sides, the Russian and Japanese people. And during this period, we have significantly deepened our dialogue on political and security matters. We have reached breakthrough achievements in the area of economic cooperation, including energy cooperation between our two countries. Russia again and again showed clearly that it is a responsible supplier of strategically important LNG, crude oil, and other energy resources to Japan, and that Russia does not use energy as a weaponry, though it is used economic matters as a weaponry by certain countries. And then we had really breakthrough achievements in the area of cultural and humanitarian cooperation, including crossing years of Russia and Japan back in 2018 and 19. So in general, our relations, though there were of course certain differences in our approaches to certain matters, they've been developing in a very friendly, very good neighborly, very constructive and mutually beneficial way. Unfortunately, due to unfriendly actions from the Japanese side, by the Japanese side, after we had to start our special military operation in Ukraine back in February this year, in full accordance with the UN Charter, using our right to self-defense. The unfriendly actions from the Japanese side unfortunately worsened our relations greatly, and now the future of our relations is uncertain. Our stance is that if we talk about, let's say, improvement of our relations, the initiative should be from the side that destroyed these relations. So if and when the Japanese side feels that it is ready to present this or that initiative for improvement of our relations, we proceed from the point that these initiatives should be delivered to us through diplomatic channels, and we will consider them. So that is what I would like to tell you as my starting remarks. Thank you very much for your kind attention. I'm ready to answer your questions if there are any, and once again my apology for being late today. Thank you.
Thank you, Ambassador. Okay, let me just start with the first question, which I believe you expect from everybody. Today, the American ambassador has sent out a tweet and an open letter signed by, I believe, 40 or 42 ambassadors. Do you have any comment on that? And related to this, I noticed that the letter is signed only by European and US ambassador. No South American, no African, and no Asia. Is there any meaning on that? What is your reading of this? Is the world so much divided on your position, or is just that maybe the American embassy forgot about asking them?
It's not the American embassy who forgot asking them, it's the United States of America who forgets asking the other members of international community about anything. pursuing their own egoistic policy. But coming back to your question, well, first of all, as I mentioned in the very beginning, I had very many functions today, so I had no time to read the letter you just mentioned, and actually I learned about its existence only when I arrived to the FCCG, and I had time only to read the very first, let's say, part or sentence. That Russian ambassador once said that Russia will not occupy Ukraine.
Yes.
Really, I said that we will not occupy Ukraine because it is the United States who occupies a part of Syrian territory, for instance. It is the United States that was occupying Iraq for many years, and without any legal grounds to do so. It is the United States who not only just occupied Iraq, but it is the countries that destroyed Iraq as a state and made Iraq and turned Iraq into a huge area where international terrorist activity started, damaging and destabilizing the situation all over the world. What we are doing in Ukraine, it's not an occupation, first of all. This is our response using our right to self-defense, which is clearly stipulated in the UN Charter. It is our response to the policy, to the hostile policy of the NATO countries headed by the United States. That, first of all, encouraged the criminal policy of Kiev regime, who has conducted and is conducting genocide policy against the Donbas region, against the peoples of Donetsk and Lugansk democratic republics, and it is our response to the United States and other NATO members who turned Ukraine into an anti-Russian state, which has and has hostile plans of military invasion to Crimea, a Russian territory. So it is not an occupation. Occupation, it is what the United States is doing in many countries of the world, or has been or had done in many countries of the world. So, but frankly, I didn't expect. I expected something like that. So it's not a surprise for me, and of course, in no way it may have any influence on my activity here in Japan. We have a lot of things to say about the destructive policy of the United States itself in Ukraine. For instance, it is about researches and exploration of the components of biological weapons in more than 30 research facilities, so-called research facilities in Ukraine, run by Pentagon, and still we do not have any clear answer from the United States on whether they actually were, on what they were doing there. Though we took up this issue in the UN Security Council for several times. If anybody occupies now Ukraine, it is the United States and NATO who actually rule Ukraine, who actually rule the Kiev regime, and who encourage Kiev regime for further meaningless so-called fighting against us, throwing the Ukrainian people into more and more sufferings. Thank you so much.
Ambassador, sorry, let's keep aside the occupation of Ukraine. But it's true that now you are somehow disoccupying it, Kherson? Are you leaving for good?
I think you have read the appeal. I think you have read the official statements of our military, and that's what it is, actually. Everything is clearly explained. We are withdrawing from Kherson to well-established lines, military lines, and that is all. I would like to remind you that in Kherson region, in Zaporozhye region, and in Donetsk and Lugansk People's Republic, there were people's referendums about the future of these four regions, and the most majority of the participants of these referendums voted in favor of being a part of the Russian Federation.
I'm sorry, but
And that is what is forever. Thank you.
okay, the UN has clearly stated what they think about this referendum.
Piotr, sorry, I didn't respond to your very, very valuable remark about about the number of countries who signed the so-called letter. Yes, you are right. You are quite right. The most majority of the members of the international community joined anti-Russian sanctions, imposed so-called anti-Russian sanctions imposed by the Western states. And of course you will tell me that, oh well, there is a UN General Assembly resolution condemning so-called Russia's occupation, etc. I will tell you quite frankly that the many and most majority of the developing nations were forced by the United States and their satellites to vote in favor. After this so-called voting, they shared with us that they were threatened, they were blackmailed even by the United States diplomats within the United Nations. So the real value of this kind of voting is really very, very low. Thank you.
Thank you. Anthony, and then...
Anthony Rowley. I'm a columnist for the South China Morning Post and a contributor. Ambassador, going back to the point made by my colleague, the moderator, frankly, I was astonished when I saw the statement signed by so many ambassadors. This club here, we try to preserve freedom of speech as far as we possibly can, including the speakers, of course. And yet that statement seemed to me to read as an attempt to preempt what you had to say before you'd even opened your mouth. And I wonder what you feel about the diplomatic protocol, if that's the right phrase, of an action like this. Have you seen an action like this before? Thank you.
Thank you so much. I fully agree with you. And again, I can only repeat what I've just mentioned. The freedom of speech is the basic component of the activity of the FCCG, and if you do not agree with what I say, okay, please express your opinion. Maybe coming here and addressing you directly. Again, it's a part of the U.S. policy of trying to maliciously slander and isolate Russia in international affairs. And what Pio said, not myself, denies completely these attempts, because again, only a minority of the UN member countries have imposed any kind of so-called sanctions towards Russia. The most majority of countries are maintaining and developing friendly and mutually beneficial relations with us, and there is no isolation of Russia within the international community, because we are cooperating with the majority of countries, and those who are imposing sanctions on us, in fact, are in isolation. Thank you.
Isabel, by the way, just a point of information, we will have, I think next week, also the American ambassador coming at the club, so the equality is maintained.
My promise not to preempt his statements by sending any letters from Moscow.
Isabella Reynolds from Bloomberg. You mentioned just now that you think the US government forgets to consult the rest of the world, South America, other parts of the globe. I was wondering, the G20 summit is coming up soon. That is a broad forum that goes beyond just Europe and America. Why isn't President Putin going to be there to make his case?
Well, I think that we explained clearly that this time Mr. Sergei Lavrov, Foreign Minister of Russia, will represent Russia at the G20 summit. Well, from time to time it happens. I recollect, for instance, how the American president once skipped, for instance, the APEC summit back in 2013 in the same country, in Indonesia, in Bali Island. Well, there are some circumstances that may prevail for this or that country. And by the way, I would like to remind you, at that time I was ambassador to Jakarta, to Indonesia, and I had great honor to welcome my president in Bali during the APEC summit back in 2013. And I recollect how during discussion with the floor at this APEC summit, it was, I think, if I'm not mistaken, it was the meeting between President Putin and the APEC Business Council, APEC Business Advisory Council. And one of the participants asked my president, what do you think about the absence of Mr. Obama? Maybe this gentleman who asked this question expected that my president will make any jokes about Mr. Obama, will criticize Mr. Obama. No. My president is a great politician, and he said that such kind of circumstances may occur to any leader of the country, and that he wishes Mr. Obama to overcome the difficulties he was facing that time. Thank you.
Goes up.
Ambassador Kazuji. I'm Kanehira from Tokyo Broadcasting System. Ambassador Kazuji, I actually regretful to hear you leave Japan, and I know that you speak Japanese perfectly, much better than Japanese, and
much better than English, definitely, but not much better than Japanese.
And I know.
Can you please have a question, please?
Okay. I know you try to improve the bilateral relationship between two countries, and tell us what is your most difficult task during your term as an ambassador in these 5 years. What is your most difficult task? And the second question. We don't have any information about your successor. No ambassador was appointed so far by your government. Do you have any comment on that situation?
Okay. Thank you so much, Mr. Kanekura. First of all, as I mentioned in the very beginning, the first part, or maybe the most part of my tenure here, was the period of successful development of the Russian-Japanese relations. We were cooperating with our Japanese colleagues for promotion political dialogue and security dialogue between our security issues dialogue between our countries. We were working together to push forward our mutually beneficial economic cooperation, including strategic area of energy. We were developing our cultural and humanitarian exchange. And frankly, speaking about that very period, I don't see any, let's say, dramatic difficulty that I would have to overcome or that I would have to address. But during the final, let's say, year or final 9 months of my mission here, yes, of course, one of my main tasks was to explain to the Japanese public opinion the real background, real reasons, and real purposes of our special military operation in Ukraine, because again, listening to the Western countries' officials and reading the Western countries' media, one may get very, very much distorted impression of our policy. And to explain the truth, to explain the real picture of our policy was and is one of my main tasks here. Thank you.
Andy?
Good afternoon, Ambassador. Andy Sharp from Nikkei Asia. So this special military operation instigated by Vladimir Putin has been estimated to have claimed up to 200,000 lives, the US estimate. 100,000 on the Russian side, 100,000 on the Ukraine side. I'm sure there are various figures. We don't know the true cost of this. But clearly, there's a lot of bloodshed. Economically, the world is bleeding right now. The special military operation, or the war, depends how you define it, has pushed up global commodity prices hugely, triggered global inflation, potentially pushing the world into recession. Even the Russian economy is forecasted by the IMF to contract 7.6% this year. So this operation or war is not only hurting the lives of people across the world, it also hurts the lives of the Russian people. When is Vladimir Putin going to pull the plug on this madness?
Well, it seems to me that it will take time to lecture you personally about the real background of what is happening now in Ukraine. You, and this is very much common for many journalists, unfortunately, in the West, you are artificially making the starting point at the 24th of February this year. It's not objective. It's not true, actually. Because the bloodshed and destruction of, for instance, Ukrainian population started in February, but of the year 2014, when the United States and other NATO countries sponsored and masterminded and supported armed coup d'etat in Kiev, which ousted the legal leadership, lawful leadership of that time Ukraine. And put on the top of the power the Nazi forces that started genocide policy towards those in Ukraine who did not accept this illegal regime change in Kiev. So bloodshed started that time, and madness started that time. And during this 8-year genocide war of the Kiev regime against its that time compatriots, or people whom they first called compatriots, but then they are starting insulting them, calling them in a very, very improper way, which I don't want to quote. This genocide, if we speak only about peaceful civilians, including children, took lives of more than 3,000 people. Do you know that there is an Angel Alley in Donetsk? Alley, which is the monument to the children who died from the Ukrainian artillery, Ukrainian air bombardments, etc. So, you said that the world was bleeding because the world economy is now in a very, very bad shape. I would agree with you. It's true. But let's recall when this bleeding started. Did it start on the 24th of February 2022? No. It started much, much earlier. The prices on energy resources and the prices on food started plummeting 2-3 years before our special military operation due to irresponsible policy of the Western countries, who first of all were so active in pursuing so-called green agenda that they reduced or limited investments in further exploration and research of fossil oils, which pushed the prices very high. The same may be said about the food prices. The Western countries fueled their economies with liquidity without any limitations during the Corona crisis. So, using this liquidity, using this money, they just bought a lot of foodstuff, a lot of food products in the developing world that again pushed prices higher. They, as I mentioned above, the lack of investments to fossil fuel research resources made it limited or reduced the production of fertilizers. Some of them, to produce some of them, the gases needed, natural gases needed, for instance. So that is what led finally to the world crisis. And then the so-called sanctions imposed on Russia after February 24th of February 2022. These sanctions led to destruction of traditional supply chain. They led to unlawful, illegal bans on Russian ships' visits to the European and American ports. So this is what pushed the world prices higher. Yes, we of course we are part of the world economy. No matter how hardly the United States and its satellites are imposing sanctions on us, and of course we also feel the influence of these economic difficulties, but also the economies and population of the countries who impose these sanctions on us are also feeling very, very heavy difficulties due to the policy of their own governments, who are trying to isolate Russia using economy as a weaponry. We see now in the streets of many European cities the mass protests against such policy. Thank you so much.
I think was yes. そうですよ。はい。
Hello, Mr. Ambassador. My name is Andriy Nazarenko. I am from Eastern Ukraine, Kharkiv, and I am Russian speaking, by the way. So I have a question.
Eastern Ukraine, sorry.
Eastern Ukraine, yeah.
Yeah, Eastern Ukraine.
Kharkiv.
Kharkiv.
Yes, and I have a question about the Russian political system. You know, I understand Russian, and lately I've been seeing a lot of news about the private military company called Wagner. Its founder, Mr. Prigozhin, promises criminals in prison that they would be pardoned if they go to the war against Ukraine. Regarding elections in USA, he says in name of Russia that we intervened in the American elections, are intervening and will continue to do so. But amnesty is the prerogative of the president, and foreign policy is the prerogative of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, isn't it? So I have a question in that regard. If a person who is nothing more than director of one private military company can send his mercenaries to the war in Ukraine instead of regular army, if he can control foreign and internal policies of Russia, can you really say that Russia is a country led by law? Mr. Ambassador did a lot of efforts to deepen relationship between Russia and Japan, but I think that respecting internal and international laws and keeping promises is the main precondition for international cooperation. So now, seeing moves in Russia, which are suspected to be against not only international law, but Russia's own constitution, a lot of Japanese companies are worried, is Russia really ruled by law or by some people in power? So please clarify about that. Is Russia really ruled by law?
Thank you.
Wow, it was rather a lecture than a question, but okay. Of course, Russia is ruled by law, and it is, according to the constitution, it is the president of Russia who determines the main directions of its domestic and foreign policy. No doubt about this. Then, if we talk about what we called private company, private military company, this very company is also conducting its activity in accordance with the domestic law of Russia. And well, I don't think you will agree with me, but I think it makes a great difference between those soldiers who are members of this company and the foreign mercenaries who are criminals who are fighting on the side of the Ukrainian forces and who are conducting, who are committing crimes together with the Ukrainian armed forces and Ukrainian Nazist battalions like Azov and others. We saw these guys when we took them as prisoners. They are covered with Nazi symbols from their legs to their heads, and it makes great difference between the soldiers of private company acting in accordance with the Russian law and those so-called soldiers of fortune who are coming to Ukraine, in many cases illegally. Just remember, I just want to recall that not far than yesterday, the Japanese government official again warned the Japanese nationals not to go to Ukraine because there was a mass media information that a Japanese national died when he was fighting within the Ukrainian units. So Russia is about law, and that is why we explain in a very clear manner the legal grounds of our special military operation in Ukraine. I have mentioned about this. I just mentioned about this in the very beginning, so I won't repeat it. And if you talk about some expressions, some statements, some remarks of this or that person in Russia about what they call interference with the American domestic affairs. So Russia is a free country, and there is a freedom of speech. So any person can speak what it actually thinks, and there is. I don't think it's a great problem. And if you mentioned this topic of interference, let's recall what happened in your country back in February 2014, when not just this or that private person said this or that, expressed this or that remarks. I remember very clearly, I saw it on TV screen, when during the anti-government so-called demonstrations in Maidan Square, together with those people who gathered in Maidan Square and opposed and were conducting these opposition movements against that time Ukrainian government, there were such persons as foreign ministers of many European Union member states. There was the Assistant Secretary of the United States of America. That was the state-based interference in the domestic affairs of Ukraine, the interference that was the main reason of the tragedy your people is suffering now. Thank you.
Ambassador, I believe you owe us a few minutes more because you started late.
Yes. I'm fully at your disposal.
Oh, okay. Because we still have some
I was
questions.
late and this maybe.
Thank you. So, gentleman there, and then we have a couple of questions online, and then we'll go back to them.
Good afternoon, Mr. Ambassador. I'm Akira Nemoto from Asahi Shimbun. I have two questions. As you just mentioned that today the Japanese government announced the death of a Japanese guy who fought in Ukraine for Ukraine. And do you have any comment on that? In your view, is he a mercenary or like a volunteer fighter? And secondary question is, you have since the start of what you call the special military operations, you have continued to make statements in line with Russian government's position. And
About what?
You have continued to make statements in line with Russian government's position. And you are now leaving Japan. And are you sure that you have no regret on what you have said and what you have done during this time. And thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. Well, first of all, speaking frankly, I've just seen only yesterday. Yesterday I saw the made information that a Japanese national died in Ukraine, and yesterday also I heard that the Japanese government again confirmed that it advises to the Japanese nationals not to visit Ukraine by any reason. That is what I've heard. Now you said that the Japanese government confirmed the death of that person in question. Well, again, we consider as an illegal activity the mercenaries activity in Ukraine. So I can only say that it is better for the foreign nationals not to become mercenaries in Ukraine, because if they are mercenaries in Ukraine, they naturally become a legal target for our military. That is about the first part of the question. About the second part, well, for sure, my main task during my mission in Tokyo was to contribute to friendly, good neighborly, and constructive and mutually beneficial relations development between our countries, and there is nothing to regret about this. It was my job, and I tried to do my job as effective as I could, as effective as it was in my ability. And but tango needs two to dance it, and that is why after we started our special military operation, and after the Western countries started this break dance alone instead of tango for two. Well, of course, it is rather difficult to develop relations with Japan, unfortunately. That, if I regret about anything, it is the position of our counterparts who now are not in the mood to develop relations with us. Thank you.
Let's go online a little bit for a couple of questions, but very quick. One, yes or no. Did you, from Karin Nishimura from France, did you attend the funeral of Abe Shinzo, a private one, on July 2nd or 12th, or yes or no? Because yes.
I was in the Zojoji Shrine. Yeah.
Okay, good. And the other from online is from Turkish BBC World, Eugene Yılmaz. She's asking a few questions, but let's start with this one, which I found very provocative for you. President Putin has a special relationship.
BBC Turkey.
Yes.
Okay.
President Putin has a special relationship with Turkey, which is a NATO member and does not apply sanctions against Russia. President Erdogan is very active in this period. But President Erdogan, a son-in-law, heads the company manufacturing and selling to Ukraine the famous Bayraktar drones that gave so much damage to the Russian military operations. How do you explain this apparent contradiction?
First of all, it's not for a Russian ambassador to Japan to explain a contradiction with regard to the policy of Turkey. It's not for me to actually. This is the very first time I hear this news, and I only can say that apart from private business activity, relations between Russia and Turkey are very constructive. Relations between Russia and Turkey are friendly, good neighborly. And I would like to quote my president, who said recently that maybe it is difficult to reach an agreement with President Erdogan, but if once we reached this agreement, if once we concluded any agreement, there is no doubt that Mr. Erdogan will follow it. So that is, these words of my president are the main sign for me about how we are doing things with Turkey. Thank you.
Thank you.
Will Fee from the Japan Times. I just wanted to say first that based on my own experience of being in Ukraine, that Ukrainians were not generally anti-Russian, as you said, until Russia's original invasion of their territory in 2014, and a lot of them have simply made a decision to move away from the Russian sphere of influence and less towards the US than towards Europe, which should be their sovereign right as a free and independent nation. For a question, you spoke earlier about Japan's unfriendly attitudes towards Russia worsening the bilateral relationship. Since Russia's invasion, most people-to-people exchanges have ceased. But in places like Hokkaido, where many cities and towns have sister city relations, there's also a strong economic aspect to relations with Russia. So just to confirm from your earlier comments, is there no motivation from your government side to relax the suspension of certain types of exchanges? Thank you. The suspension of certain types of exchanges.
Oh, you mean this?
The cultural.
No. I think you mean this exchanges between the South Kuril Islands and Japan. That's what you mean?
Yeah, any kind of exchanges.
Any kind of. Yeah. Okay, thank you. Your first question, the first part of your question. Unfortunately, Pio, these questions are not supposed to be answered in a way of yes or no. First of all.
I'm not complaining as far as you spend the night with us.
I've never said that generally Ukrainians are anti-Russian. I said that it was the United States and NATO that made Ukraine, that turned Ukraine into an anti-Russia state. It's not about the Ukrainians in general. It's about Ukrainian state, which is definitely anti-Russian. About the Russian-Japanese relations. Again, it is not Russia that suspended, as you say, this or that exchange with Japan. Unfortunately, the initiative to cut ties in many areas came from our counterparts. And in some cases we had to respond. And we responded. That is why, as I mentioned above, we are open for pragmatic and mutually beneficial cooperation with Japan, actually, in many areas. And we have proven it. For instance, we continue our cooperation in the energy area on the basis of new conditions we set for foreign investors. We continue our cultural exchange. For instance, we launched the Russian Cultural Festival in Japan this year also. Then we respond positively to the humanitarian issues which from time to time may occur between the two countries which are close neighbors. For instance, you heard definitely about the tragic maritime accident in April in the waters of Hokkaido, in Japanese waters of Hokkaido, when a cruising ship sank and 26 people died. Unfortunately, I express my condolences to the victims, to the relatives of the victims, and three persons, well, three bodies were taken to Russian shore by the sea waves, by sea current, and we after certain process of identification of the bodies, we of course delivered them back to Japan, and we are of course ready to cooperate with our Japanese neighbors in such matters, in such areas as a neighbor. So it's not for Russia to now to speak what should be or should be not suspended. I think our counterparts should make a decision whether they keep our relations in their current situation, which does not respond to the interests of Japanese and Russian people, in my opinion, or they want to improve it. If they want, so we will receive their initiatives and consider them. Thank you.
Yes.
My name is Yusuke Chino with Fuji TV Japanese News. It's a little bit different question. Russian diplomatic blue plate holders committed so many parking violations and ignored paying their fines by the diplomatic immunity in Japan. Russia is by far the worst. What do you think about it? And don't Russian diplomats have much intention to comply with the law?
You are very, very late. You are late about 2 or 3 years. Because this very situation might take place several years ago. But taking into account the how should I say, demands of the Japanese side, we improved the situation greatly. Yes, yes. Please.
The newest data from the Japanese National Police Agency. I mean about not violation, about the.
Do you want me to answer,
no,
or do you want to discuss?
Please let them answer.
And we improved the situation greatly, and we were very strict to those who might violate some Japanese regulations. Please ask the foreign minister of Japan, and they will show you new information. And this is one point. Second point is that something tells me that it was not only the Russian embassy that might make some mistakes. But on the other hand, I've never heard any questions in public about other embassies, including the embassies of the Japanese, of the countries that are very, very close to Japan. So we take measures to respect the rules and laws of the state where we are accredited in accordance with the Wien Convention on Diplomatic Relations. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, the lady there, I think this is the last question.
Hello, I'm Chicago Cover from NTV. What do you think of at least 300,000 young Russians leaving country since special operation has started?
Oh, okay. Well, there is a free flow, freedom of living in the country or freedom to enter the country in Russia. No problem about that. And so those persons who left Russia, they used their right for free movement. This is my first point. And the second point is that if you mean how it can be connected or not connected with the partial mobilization in Russia, so we should not judge on all of them in one package. There should be individual approach about why this or that person left Russia. That is what I can tell you.
All right, Ambassador. I understand you have been saying hello to many Japanese politicians, personally, including Mr. Hatoyama. And he is a former prime minister. And he tweeted a very nice tweet about your encounter. Could you tell us what was the most, say, affectionate sayonara from a Japanese politician?
Well, you're right that now I mainly say not hello but sayonara because now is time to leave Japan, to complete my mission and to leave Japan. Well, Mr. Yukio Hatoyama, my good and old friend and great Japanese statesman and politician, has made a great contribution to the development of Russian-Japanese relations, and it may be said about the whole Hatoyama family, because you know that his grandfather, Prime Minister Ichiro Hatoyama, back in 1956 visited the Soviet Union and signed the joint declaration of the Soviet Union and Japan, ceasing the state of war and restoring friendly relations, restoring diplomatic relations between our two countries. Mr. Ichiro Hatoyama, the son of Mr. Ichiro Hatoyama, was once the foreign minister of Japan, and in this position he took care also of the Soviet-Japanese relations. Then Mr. Kunio Hatoyama, the younger brother of Mr. Yukio Hatoyama, late LDP politician, he passed away unfortunately. Also, once there was a period when he was the chair of the organizing committee of the Russian Cultural Festival in Japan, and of course Mr. Yukio Hatoyama, my good friend, and he is very, very positive. He's very, very friendly to Russia. He's very, very objective in.
Even now?
He's even now.
Okay.
Objective, responsible, and fair in his assessments of what is going on. So I value very highly Mr. Yukio Hatoyama's contribution, and I value very highly our friendship, and I'm very thankful to him for our friendship.
Are you going to throw a sayonara party at your embassy for you? And if yes, who are you going to invite from the Japanese government side?
Well,
Well, your predecessor did throw very, very good parties.
Yes, my distinguished predecessor, Honorable Ambassador Afanasyev, hosted his farewell party in a slightly different situation. You know. So I want to act in his manner. I want to act in the manner he acted that time, but it is not. Sometimes it is not possible. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Oh, Ambassador,
Oh.
Mr. Chairman,
Nice to meet you, Mr. Reagan. Nice to meet you.
I'm sure you are aware you're on my time.
Yeah.
In 15 minutes, the Tokyo Symphony will be on this stage for our rehearsal. And I just wanted to say, for an old friend, Ambassador Galijin represents something that I personally, as music director of the Tokyo Symphony, treasure very much.
Okay,
I'm older than anybody.
thank you.
In 1963, I was in Moscow, in Russia, and in Kiev. I played in the Kremlin. I've played in the Russian embassy here 5 times, more than any other embassy in Japan. And Ambassador Galijin and I have been longtime friends. I'm really very
Okay, sorry, but this is a press conference. I'm sorry.
I'm
Yes,
sorry. My
okay.
orchestra is going to be here
Yeah,
in
okay.
2 minutes.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Ambassador.
Thank you so much, Mr. Rector. Thank you. Wish you all the best.
Ambassador, you are already a member of the club, and I don't think that extending another year would be any more for you. So this is a token of our T-shirt, I don't know if it's your size, and a pen with which I hope you can give it to Putin and sign it.